We have with us cybersecurity experts from US and India. We have with us adjunct professor at Johns Hopkins SAIS and the lead threat analyst at Sentinel One. We also have Kushal Das, who is working with the Freedom of Press Foundation. They have been working on security issues for a long period of time, and they are the most some of the most reputed names in the field. So I thought that why not ask them how a journalist should try to protect themselves from malware. So I'd like to focus this discussion not just on Pegasus, but in general about how journalists and activists can stay safe from viruses and malware. Let's start with Juan.
Sure. So thanks, Aveek, for having us on here. For everybody, my name is Juan Andres Guerrero-Saade. Jags is fine. Juan is fine. I'm over at Sentinel One, as Aveek had mentioned. More than happy to help however we can under current circumstances. It seems everybody's very stressed out about the sort of rash of malware that we're dealing with, and understandably so. Aveek, did you want to go through like a specific questions, or do you want us to just kind of speak freely? What do you prefer?
I prefer you speak freely because frankly speaking, I really don't know much about it. So you are the expert here, you are the boss. So
all right.
I think it's better that you speak on all the aspects in the way that in the order of importance. So it's better that I don't interrupt you there.
Sure. So let's tackle the topic for everybody involved, right? There's just to kind of put bounds on this, right? When it comes to securing the newsroom and securing journalists in a more official capacity, I would point you at amazing people like Runa Sandvik, who have kind of made this like their thing, and Runa's amazing at that. And I would, for folks that are trying to have a more organized effort at this for their organizations, I would point you at her. For the malware side of the house, which is sort of near and dear to me, I kind of want to emphasize sort of the basic part of defense, and then we can talk about some of these more advanced attacks now that are at the top of everyone's minds, right? So first and foremost, there's really basic advice that I think, we want everybody to kind of follow, that we need to build on top of, right? Like, obviously patching and updating your systems is at the top of the list. It makes it really easy for folks to hack into your machines when you leave, low-hanging vulnerabilities that, they're probably exploitable based on code that's already freely available on GitHub. So please, don't ignore those patching mechanisms. They're super important. On top of that, and this is not a sales pitch, but endpoint protection is really important. Some kind of anti-malware, ideally a really good one. The reason I'm emphasizing this is not because I'm selling anything in particular, but rather because there are types of attacks that are simply beyond what users can see and what they can reasonably protect against. So if you're landing on a page with an exploit kit, if you accidentally double click on something that you shouldn't, there's all kinds of ways that stuff executes on your system. Hell, let's put it a different way. Somebody comes in when you're not at your house, plugs in a USB device and runs a piece of malware. You didn't do anything, but the malware is running. So there's a lot of ways that you're going to want something that can inspect the integrity of your system a little deeper. And then another thing that I really want to emphasize is, particularly because everybody tends to live their lives on email, there's only so much you can do to kind of defend that on your own. It's much easier when you jump on a service like, let's say, Gmail or Office 365 that are very well protected by much bigger companies. And of course, enable two-factor authentication. You can even get into some of their advanced protection suites like what Google offers. These things are important. That's sort of like the very base layer, right? And I have to kind of catch my breath and apologize for my cat who's kind of like running around screaming behind us. So is it cool up to that point? Like, are there questions or things we should address, or can we just kind of keep building on top?
one thing I really liked is that the initial comment, the first and foremost important thing, that's like exactly matching the same, even though we never had any discussion like what we are going to talk about it before, is that how many people actually completely miss the fact that they need to get updates for their phones, computers, like in every case. Like I know so many people who would like, because just because they're writing something, they would not love to, update maybe their Windows box or even the Mac update for months. It's like, I don't want to disturb my flow, or the same thing with a mobile phone. So just by doing the updates regularly, maybe before going to bed, that's a very important thing than like most of the any other like feature you want to look for. So it's really nice to hear that part as the first point from you also.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the reason we're emphasizing this is it's really easy to get swept up in the news right now of, look, there's super advanced attacks and zero-day exploits and this really expensive capabilities. But the truth is that most attacks are not using any of that stuff. They are very cheaply done. They're very easily done. And, let's have a little common sense about this, right? Like if you're not, if you can get hacked cheaply, why would somebody spend a ton of money? Right? It's sort of a simple dynamic, right? So I think the next tier that we need to kind of discuss is what we call targeted attacks. And it's mostly sort of an espionage thing, but the idea is, obviously there's a certain set of threats that have to do with, opportunistic attacks, people who just, clicked on a spam email, whatever, and, they get hit with ransomware. Those happen to everybody. Targeted attacks are meant to specifically go after a specific individual or folks involved in a particular organization. This happens all the time to government individuals, folks who are good targets for intellectual property theft, for government espionage. And sadly, we're seeing that with a lot of different governments and a lot of different interests, journalists fall into that, activists fall into that, NGOs fall into that. Sadly, there's not a lot of rules of the game as far as cyber espionage goes. Now, we're talking about targeted attacks, which means they're putting a lot more emphasis and a lot more resources into going after you in particular. They might try to, use lures from somebody that documents that they know that you're interested in, things, if you're a journalist, if I email you from an account you've never seen before and say, look, here's a scoop, a bunch of leaked documents from, some amazing story that you've never heard of, I understand that you're going to be tempted to click on that. But more often than not these days, we have to be really cautious about what comes along with those things. And I wish I had a lot of simple advice. I don't have a lot of simple advice for you. Once we're talking about targeted attacks, things get very complicated, right? So I want to emphasize two things. The lower end of the house is still a particularly effective tier of attacks. And for a story that'll probably feel fairly close to home, rather than talking about Pegasus and NSO, I would actually point at cases like, and I'm probably going to mispronounce this, but Bima Corrigan, where what you're seeing is it's one of the most horrifying cases in the entire malware space. I don't think that enough of us in the Western world are paying attention to it. We should. But if you look at the forensic reports, it's not special malware. It's nothing high end. It's not super sophisticated. It's tricky. And it exploits certain things like, your victims, what they're interested in. They don't necessarily have a good, AV solution, antivirus that's going to help them. And what you end up seeing is very low end, very cheap malware that everybody knows about lives on those machines for months and years, reporting back on what these people are doing. And sadly, in a case like Bima Corrigan, the scariest possible scenario, allowing somebody to put something in your machine that you didn't even know about. So let's keep in mind that, NSO, Pegasus, all that stuff, it's important and we're going to talk about it. But for the most part, that's not the kind of attack that the 90% of targeted folks have to worry about. We're still talking about Windows malware that everyone knows about, or maybe Mac malware, depending on what you're using, and a lot of clever lures and clever tactics to try to get at you.
If I may add a couple of points, just exactly where you ended with that, like sending documents and, for example, like sending emails with details or headlines which you love to click. So those kind of attacks are much more easier to do. We see regular spams related to that. And it's always easier to, if you know the profile of the journalist or the activist, to pull them into the idea. Like, hey, you should read this particular PDF file, or you open this document, get all the secret details of the things you're receiving. So as like one mentioned that, like before going into 0 days or all of those high-end attacks, just going through these basic things, making sure that you are covering your basics, that will give a much better digital sanity more than anything else. There are tools available which can help a person up to somewhat level, but only up to a certain level. None of the tools are 100% bulletproof. One must understand that point also. If anyone comes and tells you that this one tool or this one thing, now you install it and you are out of, like you are in a protection where no one else can get anything bad to you, that's wrong. Because I saw that also happening in many cases. And because like we are talking about one Indian example, we should also remember that it's much easier to snatch our phones in the street than going through even a single malware. Like who needs to send you a file or do a PDF thing? Like just send someone to grab your phone and then it will be found after 2 hours. You do not know what happened. And in many cases, like I heard from other friends, and even in few cases, I personally heard from the people that they are really worried about 0 days, and like they heard about these companies selling tools and like services, whatnot. But at the same time, their password is always 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And they go to conferences or coffee place, like tea shops in particular in India, or like standing, talking to friend and having the phone unlocked, holding on their hand, or, completely forgetting about the phone while in a restaurant. So those are much more easier target for anyone if they want to target, and like sometimes just random criminals on the street.
It's completely right. I mean, I can't agree enough. And it really gets us into a particular point, which is physical access to devices, right? You can, obviously you can steal the phone. Something else that we saw, if you pay attention, there was a case in Turkey almost 10 years ago where some journalists from Oda TV were also, hit with some malware. There was what's called an interdiction. They went into their houses, into their offices, and accessed the devices when they weren't there. Look, I wish that I could give you some very sunny advice and tell you that things are going to be easy. Things are not going to be easy in this particular field, right? You're doing something risky and you're doing something admirable by being journalists and activists. And we want you to continue to do this. We want, civil society is stronger for having folks like you doing your jobs, and we want you to continue to do them. Sadly, as you go up against the interests of certain folks who are not comfortable with what you're doing, it really puts you in a space very similar to what spies call denied area operations. You are basically living in the land of someone who controls the environment, who is uncomfortable with what you're doing, and that puts you in a more difficult threat posture than other folks. It means that you have to worry about the physical safety of your devices. It means you can't just leave them alone, leave them, sitting somewhere unaccompanied. You have to be careful. There's all sorts of attacks that we don't talk about quite so much anymore, but cold boot attacks, somebody coming in and logging into your machine. If your hard drive is not encrypted, they can change the hard drive while the machine is off. There's so many things. And that's not to scare you, but rather to give a realistic threat posture of what you need to consider when you're doing this work. Kushal mentioned, just stealing the device. We've seen this. Now, obviously, if they steal your device, it's no longer with you. It no longer works as a tracking device. It no longer gives them updated information unless they find a way to return it. I think in a lot of ways, what we're worrying about with Pegasus is that you're basically walking around with a tracking device in your pocket, listening to all your conversations. And I wish that I had really simple advice for how you handle that. I don't. The truth is that if we're talking about iPhone 12s with the latest software being hit, I can't give you simple advice like, look, gotta have a strong password and you need to update your system. You basically need to treat this little, beautiful black box as not something that's your friend. And that's a very difficult thing in our modern life, but it's something to consider when you're dealing with sensitive materials. You don't need to live your life off the grid. You don't need to go live in the forest. But for folks that are handling, sensitive sources, sensitive documents, who are doing investigative journalism, particularly within the countries that you're investigating, this isn't necessarily your tool. It becomes the tool for somebody else. And at that point, what we're talking about is being careful with your pattern of life, being careful with tradecraft concerns, operational security concerns, and not technical stuff. This isn't going to be solved by purely technical means.
If I add a little bit more, is that this is all about habit building. It cannot be done in one day. You may, as like Juan said, that you may find that these things are really difficult to do, or to stay away from your phone for a certain time, or not to use some particular device, or not to talk in the same way you were always happy to talk, like standing in the corner just beside the window and telling everyone else what your next plan is. But these things takes time to build up the habit. And also a little amount of external help will also help you to pick up these habits easily. That's what one started talking about at the very beginning, that Runa and others, they provide provide help to the journalist and similar groups. I just want to plug in something. I asked Aveek permission for this beforehand, that in India, me and a couple of my friends, and we provide digital security training for free to the journalists and activists up to a certain level, so that they understand what the problems are. And we do not try to tell you, use these 10 tools and your problems will be solved. But we spend more time on threat modeling, and to understand what are the issues that can arise and how bad those can go for you. The kind of trouble one journalist working against, say, some sort of mafia in some parts of India, and one journalist who's handling national news or security news can be a little bit different depending on case to case. So it will not be easy, and particularly because there are so many messages we all are getting about Pegasus and 0 days and how to save ourselves, etc. I want to quote something Snowden said on a Guardian article, that how can people actually protect themselves from the nuclear weapons? So it's exactly the same question. Or if I bring it to my own, the way I try to explain is, how can we protect ourselves if a comet is coming and hitting us in next 2 days? We can't. But we can think about climate change, correct? We can think about small steps. We can give us much more protections for simple things. But there is no ultimate solution for all these big things. Because one thing, please remember, that the idea of 0 day or these big malware-based attacks, these are the things where the companies like Apple or Google, their developers do not know about the issue. That's why they called it 0 days. So it will not be possible by 1% or 10% to solve it magically by giving you some tools or some tips. You have to build up that habit.
So that's an important point. And I'm actually really glad to hear that you and your friends are providing training. Like Kushal said, it's important to have more of a habit built up. It's also important to kind of build up a certain security posture, right? Like before we worry about 0 days, are your accounts locked down? Do you have two-factor authentication? Are you reusing passwords across different services? These are things that you need to do first. You're going to get hit with something much cheaper and much easier to defend against before they bother spending hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of exploits on you, right? And that's something to keep in mind. That something successful that we can aspire to as individuals is to raise the cost of attack. If they have to spend that much money on us, it's because we're doing something right. And, it kind of puts you in a very particular kind of threat posture that we should aspire to, right? We can't be low-hanging fruit. So it's great to have folks like Kushal. It's great to be able to tap into, more organized resources like Runa Sandvik, and what other folks provide. I would also suggest when it comes to 0 days, when it comes to really suspicious things, you're not alone, right? That's the entire security industry is very devoted to tracking these things, to tracking this malware, to tracking the exploits, to getting things patched, right? So look at folks like, Amnesty International Security Lab, folks like Claudio Guarnieri, Citizen Lab with Bill Marsack. Folks are working very, very hard to get on top of these things, and they want to hear from you. If you're finding something suspicious, if you get a weird email, if you get a text message with a link, if things start acting weird on your devices, yeah, maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's, commodity malware or adware, but it may very well be something bigger. And at that point, you can avail yourself of resources like, folks in your local country who are providing help, or reach out to Amnesty International, reach out to us on Twitter, reach out to me, whomever that might be able to give you a little bit of advice. You don't have to do this alone, and you shouldn't have to, right? If you folks are experts at investigative journalism, I don't try to do your job for you. When it comes to security research, I'm more than happy to kind of pick up my end of the bargain, and so is the rest of the security community that is very invested in folks like you getting to do your jobs.
Exactly. And one other term I just wanted to mention, because we are talking about 0 days and malware, is kind of stalkerware, which are also very common attack cases, not only for journalists, but for people in their real life all the time. And the kind of work EVA is doing along with the EFF threat labs, and you can reach out all to those experts. And as Juan again mentioned, if you don't know them, ask anyone else in the on Twitter or any other places, and we'll all will help you to connect to the right people. I don't know most of the things in the security, 99.9999%. But I know I have friends. I can go and ask them. And the same thing goes around in different parts of the security. If we cannot help you directly, we'll try to help you to connect to other people. And same kind of groups, same kind of volunteers are available in many countries across the world. There are groups like Internet Freedom Foundation, IFF in India, who are not only fighting with the legal part, they're also trying to help people with their ideas about security, to increase the knowledge. So try to find out and identify these kind of groups in your locality, in your country, so that it will be easier to start talking with them. And then as required, you can reach out to the other experts.
I'm glad you mentioned stalkerware. I mean, we've been really focused on nation state stuff and government sponsored tracking, targeted attacks and whatnot. And the truth is that obviously that's a concern from the professional standpoint, from dissident standpoint. But sadly, we also suffer a variety of other threats, whether it's, financial cybercrime and ransomware and things that kind of cripple people's ability to function in a lot of ways, or might, deprive them of financial resources. And also we're dealing with the scourge of ransomware that's, a threat very close to home. It's often ignored. People don't take it as seriously as they should. And, as Kushal mentioned, there's amazing people like Eva Galperin over at the EFF who are very invested in providing help for these cases. So again, you're not alone. There's a lot of folks in the security community that are very interested in providing help. Almost always this is, pro bono when it comes to folks that are in difficult situations. We want to be able to help out as much as possible. So don't feel like your cases are not important. Obviously, some things get lost in the noise. Not everybody can answer everything, but I think if you come out here with what you've got, you're going to find somebody who's going to help you.
I have one question actually. So when we are looking at 0 days being used, what can one do to stay safe? Are there any ways, or is it such a situation where there is no way out?
So it really depends, right? The 0 days are the boogeyman of the security space. It's what everybody's scared of, right? Because the idea is that it requires very little user involvement. In some cases, it requires no user involvement. And things just happen so discreetly that you can't tell that something has happened. So In a sense, 0 days are very difficult to get ahead of, but it's something that we can break down, right? Let's not talk about 0 days as a whole, but rather, what exactly are we facing, right? When it comes to iOS and iPhone, 0 days are scary because it's a very difficult system to inspect, right? It's very hard to go through your iPhone and know if something's right or wrong, right? If you're in that particular situation, I would almost certainly advise you to talk to forensic experts who are going to be able to help you out. You're going to want, your backups. You're going to want to use Amnesty International's. They released a tool to inspect iPhones and Android phones. It's a complicated situation. That's why, honestly, our initial advice was, basically assume breach and just don't trust the phone. I mean, I hate to put it that way, but when we're talking about countries with 0 days, with these sort of advanced capabilities, there is no common sense advice that we can give you to just get ahead of it. Now, in some cases, what have we seen? Especially in Mexico and a lot of the earlier cases with NSO, they would send them text messages with weird links. They would do things that were a little bit more overt. And this has to do mostly with, what 0 days available at the time that the infection is happening. So sometimes it's amazing zero-click exploits that you have no choice on what to do. Sometimes it's a text message exploit that you have to hit a link. That's a luck of the draw thing. iOS is a difficult beast. It's incredibly secure. It's very well thought out, very well engineered. But when it comes to exploits, it gives us very few choices as to how to get ahead of the threat. Android is subject to a bit more inspection. I would definitely take a look at that Amnesty tool for inspecting these devices. Android is easier to inspect, but its security posture tends to be generally lower. So, it's a bit of a trade-off. Now, when it comes to Windows devices, we tend to be in a better space. Usually the delivery of exploits tends to come in some form that it's a little more recognizable, right? Somebody sent you a PDF, somebody sent you a Word document, an Excel spreadsheet, something suspicious. They sent you to a certain landing page that, then redirected to something else. There's ways that we can hopefully hone in on strange behaviors that will be useful in a forensic investigation. And the truth is that this isn't prevention advice. This is basically trying to figure out that something happened. It's trying to figure out that there is smoke and we should investigate for a fire. If somebody is using 0 days against you, the chances that we're going to get ahead of the threat are low. But that does not mean that there is no remediation. It does not mean that we can't increase your security posture. And it does not mean that we can't figure out that something has happened. And that's kind of the situation that we're dealing with, right? Let's get everybody in a vulnerable population up to a high enough security posture that 0 days are necessary. And then we can work together on dealing with that much more rarefied, much more expensive targeting scope of a situation, right?
I have another question. I mean, right now everyone is talking about Pegasus. When you spend millions on tracking a single individual, that's a high-value target. But should normal people be that scared? Because it would be much easier to put up physical surveillance on you. I mean, if you are in the country, then it's much easier. If you are abroad, they can send spies after you. So, I mean, if it's such a situation where physical surveillance is cheaper than cyber surveillance, so do most people have to be worried about Pegasus because that's only for very high-profile targets, or what is it? I'm not much of an expert here.
So I would suggest that we kind of parse what we mean by normal people. Right. I think part of the difficulty here is that there's a lot of folks who think they're not targets who are, and there's a lot of other folks who think that they are targets who aren't. Right. Like the thing about Pegasus is it's a targeted tool, as is most targeted malware. Right. The idea is that you select specific individuals to go after, and it's expensive, and you don't want to squander these tools. However, who is valuable is subjective and depending on the organizations, right? Like a journalist or a source or a dissident in certain countries isn't an acceptable target or isn't an interesting target, and in other countries it is. So it is going to have a lot to do with what you do with your life, what you're working on, what your sources are, that whether somebody is going to want to invest in you in that way. So if you fit within that criteria, you should have a better threat model of who is involved. So you should have a much different criteria of whether you're valuable or not. That said, no, not everyone has to worry about it. Not everyone has to worry about Pegasus in particular. There are bigger dragnets. There's other type of surveillance. There's, signals intelligence. There's, monitoring of communications and so on. But I would also suggest that you don't necessarily have to worry about that surveillance in general. Are you doing something that is worth the investment of somebody before you really concern yourself with a certain, sort of dragnet of activity? It is really about threat modeling in a lot of ways. I don't know if Kushal, you might want to add something I might have missed.
No, exactly that point. And even with the Pegasus, we are seeing the same thing, the stories that many people who thought they are in the list, we saw them are in the list. And for many people who cannot even imagine that they will be in such sort of surveillance list, they are also in the same list. So like literally nothing else to add on that particular point is like whether this can be done against you or not, because things are available in the market. For few things, a simple criminal can just spend maybe $10 at max and get something off from internet, ready-made, and be used, like they can use it against you. It doesn't have to be in a government big thing. And just starting with those very basic things where we started the whole discussion, starting from updates, and particularly updates and Android. One comment for the point of view from an Indian point, like Indian, I know that like Android is the most used phone, like the operating system here. But at the same time, many people try to buy phones which never gets any sort of updates. Like by the time they get the phone on their hand, maybe a couple of months update cycle left for them. So if you are a journalist, if you are someone who's working on such sort of stories or, activities, like you're an activist, lawyer, you're dealing with data, maybe you should start thinking there at your threat modeling level, like what kind of device you're using, can you trust, and how much money you want to spend, or how much practices you want to do in your life. What are the things you want to change in your life so that, you have a better security.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it sucks. It really sucks. But if we're being honest with ourselves, improved security comes at a very real cost. It's genuinely a matter of investment in a lot of ways, right? Like we're talking about iPhones and the security of iPhones and how concerned everybody is with iPhones. And iPhones are not a cheap thing for people to have. As it is, their security ecosystem is much better. If you can afford an iPhone, absolutely go for it. I obviously really enjoy it. But there's a lot of folks who can't afford it, and they're kind of locked into certain other situations. And it puts us in a difficult situation to give you realistic advice, right? If you're using an Android phone that's four versions old and has no patch cycle, you are in a very difficult position of being kind of low-hanging fruit. We're not talking about Pegasus. We're not talking about exploits. We're not talking about zero-day exploits. There's a lot of publicly available stuff that they can use against this, and that's where you get into some of the more like common sense advice, which I don't like. But for example, Pegasus is supposed to not have persistence at this point. What does that mean? Every time you restart your phone, in theory, the infection should clear out, and they're going to have to reinfect your phone. So we can say, hey, restart your phone every time you go to sleep or every time you wake up. I don't like that. I don't think it's the kind of advice that we should rely on, but it's a sort of, side channel vaccine that we can consider. with Android phones, if you can't afford a better phone, if you're in a situation where you have to rely on this thing, maybe we need to factory reset the phone on a regular schedule. Again, it's not great security advice. I'm not comfortable giving you this advice. But if you're in that situation, we have to do the best that we can with the tools that we have, right? So sometimes you might just be better off using a burner phone. Sometimes you might just be better off, leaving your phone behind. And it really depends on your pattern of life and what you have available to you.
Also to add, like there are many people, security experts for whom the whole idea is black and white. Like you have to use this latest gadget or else you don't have any solution or any security. And they completely miss the fact is that people are in different situations, starting from finance to their life to which country or what is the network available to them or kind of services available. So and those parts are always like when in any actual security training, when we talk about threat modeling, those are the questions we have to ask to ourselves or to the people who are participants. Is that if we give you a suggestion like, hey, I can tell you like maybe 5 tools and one can tell you maybe 50 tools, but those are all will work on certain individuals in certain conditions. So not everything will work for everyone. And at the same time, there is no silver bullet for this. So because I keep hearing this point again and again that, oh, you should do this one particular thing and you'll be okay for everywhere. No, that's not the solution. If you use tails, like that will not give you 100% privacy or anonymity. If you use Tor, that's not 100% anonymous or super secure in every way. I mean, even today evening, not morning, like someone was talking about like how they are trying to stay anonymous, but on Windows 7 computer. And my initial reaction was they're like, there are like newer versions available and you can upgrade to that. But they were not happy that I'm trying to tell them like, think about the basics first. Instead, they wanted to have some certain high security, high technical answers, which are really not possible. For example, the restarting phone. Every time we tell that, people start laughing at us. Like, what are you talking about? Like, just restarting phones. I'm like, and yeah, like people have to understand that these things, even though they sound very stupid and obviously not a 100% foolproof solution, in many cases that will help.
I think you're hitting the nail on the head, right? It's security advice for the most part. Good security advice is not sexy and it's not satisfying, right? We're talking about lifestyle changes and preparation. I promise you, most of the folks that are very, very concerned about this latest news with Pegasus should probably be a little more concerned about what's happening with their online accounts, for example. If you're on Gmail, which already is a huge step up from most other services, Gmail, Google does a fantastic job securing Gmail as best they can. They have a security checklist for every account. Take it upon yourself. Go today and follow the security checklist and figure out in what posture you've been. Look, we're talking about infecting phones and infecting machines and physical surveillance and all that stuff. But I'll be honest with you, if I'm a government player and I can just hack your email, it's cheap, it's fast, you're unlikely to notice at all. And they can see pretty much everything you're doing in one go and everything you've done for years before. So, you have to think through the mindset of an attacker that has many targets, that has to have a certain return on investment. They have a budget. They're not magicians, and they're definitely not using overkill every time that they have to. And the best thing that you can do is follow the common sense advice one layer at a time and make sure that your security posture is good. You need to update your machines. You can't be at end of life operating systems. And hope to do well. If you're on Windows XP, I'm sorry, you are out of anything that we can do for you. You can go and get an amazing, go out, get an amazing antivirus, and they're going to do their utmost to protect you, but it's going to be an uphill battle. There's free exploits that are not patched. There's all kinds of malware that's out there for free. Forget 0 days. You are basically in the lowest possible tier of threat posture. So you need to take that if you take this seriously, if you're concerned for real, not because it's a trendy thing to be worried about, but because what you do in life is important to civil society and you want to better your posture, you want to protect your sources, you want to protect what you do, this is the realistic advice that you need to follow. And forget about silver bullets and forget about the latest 0-day for iPhone. We have other things to worry about first.
Aveek, I will actually ask you to make sure that you talk about, like, I guess there will be a recording of this talk. So please talk with while you are talking with your friends and discussing these topics, ask them to this particular part again, or like for the first time, if they're seeing is that most people miss these things and they don't like it because we are not giving them, as Ivan mentioned, some sexy solution. So if people just can follow the very basic items, that will, do a lot of like battle winning for us. It will not be, war will not be over. We have to be still very much vigilant, see what else we can do to improve the situation. But for those low-hanging fruits, we can take those out. And that's where the journalist will come in, whoever like you are, who is listening to this or watching this later recording. If you can talk about these things in your writings, in your articles, in your stories, that will give us, the security folks, a real boost that, hey, more people will read about it, more people will see that this is what we are talking about. We are not asking you to buy the next $1,000 phone, or I don't think even $1,000 will let us buy here, but we are asking you very simple things, very simple steps. So just reporting on these things will help us a lot, and you also, as it together. Juan, do you have any ending comments or anything like you want to talk about particular?
So yeah, I mean, there obviously we've covered sort of the admonishing and all of trying to do basic security practices, update and take care of your devices and don't let them out of your sight, and do some threat modeling and get a good antivirus solution and so on. You might also want to be careful about actually having backups these days, with ransomware being a big thing for everybody. There's a lot happening in the security space, right? I like to remind myself that not everyone is a security expert and that they don't necessarily have the bandwidth for it. We're not telling you that you need to become a security expert in order to do what you do, but I'm afraid that it's a sad reality of life that that you need to be mindful of these forces involved, right? NSO is in the news today. The Pegasus project is amazing. It's great work, but they are very far from the only player in this space. There's a lot of nation states that are involved in this. There's a lot of commercial players that are enabling other nation states to get involved in this. If you're curious about NSO, you should, look at things like what's happening with Black Cube in different countries. And that's where you can see, Aveek had mentioned physical surveillance. That's where you can see a combination of physical surveillance, cyber surveillance, and everything in between for private, for private profit and private concerns. I'm afraid that that's just par for the course with how we live now. And the best that you can do for yourself is to take a minute to understand your threat model and say, look, these are the things that I can reasonably concern myself with, and these are the things that I can do to improve my threat posture in general. Because there's paranoid folks who are worried about, the NSA and they're running Windows XP. And then there's people who are actually investigating, war crimes, and they don't think that they're being targeted by anybody. So, there's some scales here that we need to tip on a very, personal level and take care of ourselves and take care of what we do. And it's super important. It's super important because we're talking to a sector of society that serves a vital role for democracies and for everybody's well-being. So, please take it seriously to the extent that you can. Take care of yourselves. Keep doing what you do. Don't let this have a chilling effect on your work. I know that things can be scary. I know it's easy for me to be in the US and tell you to keep doing what you do. But I hope that we can help you in every possible way. And, don't hesitate to reach out to the folks in the security community who are more than happy to provide help.
Thank you. And Aveek, you can later on particularly for YouTube, you can add our contact details, if nothing else, Twitter details, so that if people want, they can reach out to us.
Yes, I will be adding that in the description.
Yes, so I think like if you are okay, we can end with this particular note.
I think,
One explained, and like I'll just hand it over to you.
yeah, I think we have covered almost all the aspects. So, like you said, that if someone, like both of you said, in fact, that if someone feels that there's something on their phone, they should reach out. So, it might not be something, but in case it is, and if in case it's not just a simple malware, then that person actually helps. The whole security community and other people who are under threat to actually be safe from that malware, because then the security community will start researching on it, find a fix for the malware. So that's it. And again, I would like to end by saying that now people who are in India, they can at least reach out to people abroad. And in India, obviously you are there. You can reach out to Kushal Das. He helps journalists and activists uh, improve cyber hygiene, the cyber security practices. So I mean, it's not a magic bullet, like you said, but the thing is that this thing is about building something as part of your daily practices, and it has to be done over time. So. Uh, and to end, one of the best points that Juan made was that how Bhima Koregaon was not by some very sophisticated malware, but the implications of it. I mean, how activists were hounded, and they could actually face a lot of legal trouble because of this, where the malware itself was pretty simple. So if we had they taken been aware of these issues, then it would have been a little more difficult to reach target them. Maybe they would have been targeted anyway, because the state is paranoid, but maybe it would have happened at a later date.
So Vic, thank you for inviting us and for the session. Thank you, Juan. Nice to meet you. And maybe we can talk about those keyboards some other day.
We should. I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure, guys. Thank you so much for putting this together, and thanks for everybody that tuned in.
We, being an independent platform, depend on our readers, viewers, and listeners. Support independent media by subscribing to News Laundry. Go to newslaundry.com, click on the subscribe button at the top, and pay to keep news free.